Good morning, everyone. I would love to say happy Monday. It is Monday, but so far I cannot say happy has been the word of the day. Dysfunctional, disorganized, and hot mess are the words that are coming to mind initially. I could probably keep going, but I won't. We are extremely happy to have everybody join us so far this morning. We're getting everybody in the room and we will get started. Happy Monday. All right. Apologize for the delay in the Auxiliary Connections email going out this morning. It's payroll day and it's definitely rearing its ugly head this morning. So, but you should have that now. And you found the link on the website if you had not gotten the email message yet. So we're very excited about that. So we're going to go ahead and get started. You know the housekeeping rules. Chat your comments in. If you're watching on YouTube, you can, and live, you can chat your comments in and we'll pull those over and ask in the Zoom call. And if it's after the fact, go to the Auxiliary Connections survey and feedback portal and you can leave that there. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Randolph.
Good morning, Auxiliary family. I have to tell you, it's an exciting morning. Yes, it's Monday, it's a new week, but this is actually the beginning of week 8 of our time together. If you think about it, for 8 weeks, we've been putting on daily courses and afternoon interactions, and it's been good. I've gotten to know a lot of people that I wouldn't have gotten to know otherwise, and so thank you again for continuing to come. We're averaging about 150 people every morning for these courses, and it's good. I just have to put a quick plug in there to let you know that starting June 1st, we're going to shift a little. We're working with the directors of all of our units to work on something we're calling Fall Ready. We'll shift the classes a little bit. They'll be more geared towards getting all of us ready for the fall when hopefully we're back on campus and we're back into the swing of our activities. So if you see that shift, you'll hear a lot about that shift this week and next week. And then we'll start those series of courses come June 1st to make sure that we are at our tip-top polished form when we eventually get back to campus. Today, however, I want to talk to you a little bit about diversity and inclusion. And now we had a wonderful presentation from Dr. Michelle Cook on diversity and inclusion. I'm going to add to that presentation. This could be considered a introduction to some of that fall readiness stuff that we'll be talking about in a couple of weeks. I will, again, build on what she said. I'm not going to go over those pieces she listed, but you'll hear me reference them. If you're watching this and you don't know what I'm talking about, you can go back to the Auxiliaries Connection site, look at previous session videos are there, and the one I'm referring to is one that was done by Dr. Michelle Cook from the Office of the Provost. So I'm going to share my screen with you all real quickly. And I decided to call this particular session together, Diversity, Auxiliary Service, and the University of Georgia. Now, this is a presentation that I've had an opportunity to do several, I would say probably close to 200 times around campus. I don't call it together. Usually I call it Diversity at UGA Beyond the Numbers. And it looks really at our diversity numbers, but how do we get beyond that? So I typically start by asking people this question, and I caption it in this sense. And I want you to chat in your comments. Catherine or Julia, feel free to interrupt when some of those comments are coming in. So the question that I typically ask is, how diverse is UGA? And a good way to think about it is, say you're downtown Atlanta, and if you're like me, you have on something that says Georgia Bulldogs. So it's actually a cap or a shirt or something. I mean, some folks like me I've had flip-flops that say Georgia. And so you're walking downtown Atlanta, and an African-American young man, he's about 17 years old, comes up to you and say, "Hey, Georgia, I've been thinking about that school. I'm making my decision for college, but I'm really curious. How diverse is UGA?" What would your response to that be? How diverse is UGA? So if you haven't had a chance yet, I would encourage you to take a quick pause and grab a pen and a paper, because there's a couple of things I will want you to just take note of, mark down, some exercises that we'll go through virtually. But again, just throw in the comment box some responses to how diverse is UGA. Julia or Catherine, do we have any?
Not yet. I think everybody is on the same struggle bus that we are as far as waking up this morning. So nothing yet.
All right.
I personally would say we seem pretty diverse.
How so?
I mean, if you just look around campus, you can see a mix of nationalities, of genders, of there's a little bit. It's a melting pot. There's a little bit of everything.
Okay.
Everything represented on campus. So comments are starting to come in.
What do we have?
Diverse in people, though not always in culture. Jenny thinks we're very diverse in her opinion, more diverse than it used to be, not as diverse as I'd like it to be. I'm adding a word in there for Morgan. Very diverse every day on campus. Well, when we're on campus, seeing people of all kinds. Are we talking about students, faculty, and staff, or both?
So think about it. For the person who asked that, think about it from the perspective of this 17-year-old young man. He's coming. He's not just interacting with students. He's not just interacting with faculty. He's interacting with the UGA community. So his question is about the UGA community. Any other comments we have?
Depends on what you mean regarding diversity. If you're referring to difference, we are very different. Diverse in age, race, culture. We are a small United Nations. Student population is very diverse. And while we have some diversity, the percentages aren't very high.
Okay. So those are some really good comments. I like that as a mixture of comments. I also know that there are people who haven't commented in yet, who vehemently disagree with some of the comments that they've heard. I would encourage you to chime in your comments, because it's through this kind of a discourse that we make this community a community of inclusive excellence, a community where we understand the differences that exist, but we use those differences to move ourselves and our organizations forward. So if you haven't had a chance to chime in, please chime in. Don't sit on the sideline. I have to tell you, so I had another presentation that I've been thinking about for 2 weeks to do today. And my goal was to start off, to just do a prompt for us to start thinking about fall ready and what that would mean. And so I put together a really nice presentation about it to introduce that concept in advance of June 1st. But then on Thursday, I went down, so Wednesday or Thursday, I was on campus and I went by Joe Frank Harris, and I went by the back. And so just before entering, 2 of our colleagues were there, 2 of our colleagues who are currently on campus working and making sure that we're still servicing people at Joe Frank Harris. They were out there and they were in these deep conversations about race. And I just went by to say hi, and I had just left the meeting, and I sat there and I sat there for about 45 minutes just chatting with them, because it was such a fascinating conversation about race and about living in America, you know. And both of these colleagues had kids, and they were boys, and so there was a conversation about the Ahmaud Bradbury shooting and all of that. And I thought, I wanted, and the content team, the team that helps put some of these courses together, we had talked about adding a diversity course every week for the next 2 weeks before we move into the June 1st shift. But I was more convinced that, we can do the June 1st introduction now. But I can tell you just that conversation and how deep and open and honest that conversation was, and the questions that were being asked of each other. Now, we're talking people from two different races that were sitting and talking, but it was such a fascinating, engaging time. A couple of other people kind of came in, and it became a bigger conversation. And I thought, you know what, I have to go back and talk about diversity as planned rather than moving forward. So when the question is asked, how diverse is UGA? A lot of the times people think more in terms of our demographic numbers. So I've got something on the screen I want you to look at real quickly. I just want to draw your attention towards the total. So we'll start first with looking at male and female, and this is in our student population. This is not staff yet, but I wanted to use student population as kind of an indicator of where we are. So you see in terms of gender, you see what those totals are up here. And then ethnic origin, you can see. Now understand that UGA is a predominantly white institution. It's called PWI, right? If you've never heard it, HBCU, a historically Black college and university, is the opposite side of that spectrum is a PWI, like UGA, that's a predominantly white institution. So when you're thinking about how diverse we are demographically, we can't mistake that fact. We can't sweep over it. We have to face that the University of Georgia is a predominantly white institution. And the numbers here back that. Again, we're talking demographics. So we've had our multiracial numbers. I will tell you on this line that says multiracial, those numbers have been increasing over time, and those numbers took a real big jump in 2008 when Barack Obama became president of the United States, and it was said that he was multiracial. So at that point, more people started to identify based on their parental status. Also, I will tell you now, these numbers haven't always looked like that. So 3950 for our African American students. 3950 for our Asian students, 3219 for our African American students, and 2121 for our Hispanic students. Those have been numbers. If you were to go back, and I think in one of my slides I show it, if you were to go back 2008 and 1998, there are differences in those numbers. So whoever commented that we're growing and we're getting there, absolutely. Demographically, we are becoming more and more demographically diverse than we were in the past. Now, does this diversity mirror that of the state of Georgia? Not yet. Is it something that we can achieve? I don't know the answer to that. But are there progressions in terms of our growing diversity? Absolutely, yes. So this was the numbers I was talking about. The one to your left, your far left, is the current numbers we were looking at from 2018. 2008 numbers are in the middle, so you see both a total increase in our population, but also an increase in some of the other demographic diversity. And I'm not escaping the white, but given that the University of Georgia is a predominantly white institution, when we start talking growing demographic diversity, we start looking at some of the other represented groups. And then the one to the very far right, upper right-hand corner of your screen, those are the numbers in 1998. Just gives you a sense of the growth that's happened over time. So let's push this conversation a little forward a little bit more. There's a couple of slides that I usually put up when I do this presentation. Now, for me, really say, yes, we're not where we should technically be if the state of Georgia's diversity demographic numbers were the benchmark, we're not there. But sometimes we spend too much time thinking about where we aren't, and we fail to see the other aspects of diversity that exist. and what all of us bring in to make the University of Georgia a diverse place. Now, some of you may be wondering, why is he talking about UGA? I work for auxiliaries. Well, you work for auxiliaries inside of UGA, and there is not a unit, another division on campus that touches our students more, in my belief, than auxiliaries. And we touch all of those students that you see us talking about. Beyond that, there's not another unit, in my opinion, at the University of Georgia that interacts with our staff on a daily basis as much as we do in auxiliary services. And I want to push it even one step further. I firmly believe that there is not another unit at the University of Georgia, another division that interacts with our visiting folks, so our community members from far and wide, our international visitors, our Atlanta visitors, our New York visitors. There is not another unit or division that interacts more deeply and directly with the people that make up the University of Georgia's community like we do in auxiliary services. So it's important to understand what UGA looks like in order for us to really think about what our engagements around diversity in auxiliary service mean and should look like. Now, this map I put up, this map here shows all of the states where all of our students come from. And if you look, every single state in the 50 states are represented. In fact, the territories are also represented in our student body. And I've asked the same question so much that I've kind of memorized the same example. And the example is this. I'm going to describe for you a person, and I just want you to picture that person in your head for me. A female student, white, blonde hair, blue eye, 5'10", from Seattle, Washington. She'll go all the way to the left of your screen, all the way up at the top of your map. Seattle, Washington. Female student, 5'10", blonde hair, blue eyes, 17 years old. I also want you to picture a second student, a female student, blonde hair, blue eye, white, 5'10", 17 years old, from Biloxi, Mississippi. And the question that I typically ask is, are those two students the same? The answer, and I'm going to be a little impatient, the answer is they're not the same. They're not the same. Demographically, we can put them in the same race category, but there's a lot of other things that will make them very different and not the same. Let's come home a little closer. So this is a map of the state of Georgia, and all, forgive me, I think it's either 157 or 159 counties. Now you may be wondering, like I was when I saw this initially, why does Georgia have so many counties? And it kind of bounced around in my head for a while until somebody explained to me, give me an explanation that I can live with. So I'm going to give you that explanation. That back in the days, they wanted to ensure that the citizens of Georgia had immediate access to their officials. And so the counties represented these county seats where if I had an issue that I needed to address with my official, I don't have to come all the way to Atlanta if I'm in Fannin County or if I'm in Grady County. I don't have to come all the way to Macon or somewhere like that, one of the big populated areas, in order to interact with public officials. So that's why we have all of these. That's beside the point. What's interesting about this is it shows you where all of our students who are from the state of Georgia come from, the counties that they come from. And you will see that just about every county, usually there's one county, and I'm trying to look and see, Taliaferro County was the one that is kind of towards almost like not far from Morgan County, Greene County. Taliaferro County has 0. Usually Quiltman County doesn't have one, but it's between those two counties that we have that 0 number. But outside of that, every single county here has been represented on our campus in the fall of 2018. Here's the question for you. A blonde-haired, blue-eyed, 5'10", 17-year-old white female from Fannin County Towns County, or Rayburn County, or Catoosa County, or Dade County, any of those northern counties. And a blonde hair, blue eye, white, female, 5'10", 17 years old, from Lowndes County, or Eccles County, or Thomas County, or if the example that I love to give, or from Albany, Georgia, right? Is that the same student? And the answer, I'll tell you, will be no. And this diagram just really shows you the beginning of the layers of diversity. So there's personality. Race, you see, is not the biggest piece there, but race is where we talk about a lot, because race is where we see we've been accustomed to learning about our differences based on our race. But this particular diagram just really, really shows you how diversity plays out. If you wanted to think about this a little bit, COVID-19 has really taught us a few things. Now, some of us, it will be a bleeping thought, and we'll go back to our normal selves. But COVID-19 really showed us something about income inequality in America, and lower paid groups or groups with lower socioeconomic status, and the impact of healthcare, the impact of the virus, the impact of just all of the things, the impact of jobs and all of these things. Before, people didn't think about that. They thought about race as these big categories. But I can assure you that this wheel that I'm showing you just touches a little bit of really what truly makes us a diverse and inclusive body of people at UGA. So I would agree 100% with just about everybody who commented in terms of whether or not UGA is diverse. Is UGA a diverse place? Yes. You can respond to that, young man. It is diverse because we have all of this, because our definition of diversity does not just look at one aspect of diversity, which is race. It looks at age, it looks at gender, it looks at gender identity, it looks at geographic origin, it looks at religion, sexual orientation, veteran status, and the like. Most of you do not know that currently at the University of Georgia, I say currently, but let's just say in the spring, or let's say fall of 2019, that there were 125 countries represented on our campus. 125 countries. Imagine the culture that could be learned and garnered if we interacted with folks from 125 countries. What's interesting is you and auxiliaries did interact with just about every single one of those individuals. How did you maximize those interactions to expand your own knowledge of diversity is a question that I'll leave you with. So I'm going to get a little academic for you. So there's several different models that people use to talk about diversity. This particular one is a model called Diversity and Emotional Intelligence. I love this model because for me, it really speaks to the progression that we can make. First, the identification of what diversity truly is, particularly in the workplace, particularly in the social spaces that we engage in, as well as what diversity and inclusion can be as we all begin to take active parts and active roles. On Friday, our afternoon session talked about the bystander effect. I'll touch a little bit of things in this presentation that may speak to how sometimes we can become bystanders. But the model looks at 4 areas. So affirmative introspection. In that particular area, just simply says, I'm going to look at myself and I'm going to say, this is who I am. I'm not really going to give myself a judgment call at this point. I'm just identifying, this is who I am. This is what makes me tick. This is what I value. This is what I abhor. These are the people I'm drawn to. These are the people I don't like. So that's what affirmative introspection is. A lot of us don't have an opportunity to do that because sometimes we don't want to see what's in the mirror if we were to truly look at ourselves. Alongside affirmative introspection and self-governance says, now that I know all of this stuff about myself, when I'm put in situations where my values become tested, how do I respond? How do I manage myself? What are those things that I'm ambiguous about? But what are those things that really get on my nerves and rub it in for me and I just want to go off? Intercultural literacy, to the left of the model, really says, okay, how can I learn more about people, places, things, thought processes that are different from me? How can I open my mind to engage more around learning about diversity and truly the benefits that a diverse group of people can bring to my own personal growth and status. The last one is social architecture, and this one is really your mobile. This is where all of us can't be bystanders, but each and every single one of us have a calling to become social architects in the spaces that we hold. So on the bus, if you're a bus driver, there's some social architecture that can happen on the bus that you can be responsible for. If you're on one of the serving lines, there's some social architect in there. If you're in the dish room, and I've been in the dish room, there is some social architecting that can happen in the dish room that together makes us gives us the potential, I should say, to become a really diverse and robust organization. So let's dive into this model. I'm just going to touch pieces of it. So what I have is another wheel, and this is called the value wheel. And I use this for several different things, but when it comes to diversity, it's one of the most important wheels that I use. And this wheel looks at our value system. So it asks us different questions. And once we get back to campus, I'll make this wheel available for you all so that we look at it. The question is that I will ask you on a little piece of paper I've asked you to grab and jot down stuff, is when you look at this wheel, what areas here on the big topical areas, what areas would you say are your high priority areas? These things are very important to me. And if anybody messes with these things, then they've messed with me. Or what areas are your low priority? I really don't care about that. That's not me. That's not for me. That's not what I'm drawn to. I will also ask you, what areas are your neutral areas? Because the neutral and the low value areas are those areas where then we become these watchers. We watch the things that happen. Ask yourself, how important is parenting for me? Is it a high value area, value parenting, or is it a low value area? How important is spirituality for me? You know, in the South, spirituality, we know it's a really big thing. I used to do a number of faculty sessions on how do you hire, the whole hiring and recruitment process for faculty members. And one of the greatest examples that I always heard was, you know, somebody comes to campus for an interview and somebody's working with them, and the first question they get asked is, so what church do you go to? And the first one, I don't go to church. In the South, it's like, whoa, something is wrong with you. You don't go to church. You don't go to church. Right. And so so again, spirituality is a high value area. I will tell you, spirituality is a high value area for me. Now, am I the one who's going to say, oh, you don't go to church? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Physical well-being could be a high value area for some folks, and physical well-being could be a very, very low value area for others. I go back to parenting. There's an example that I always give on this wheel, because the people who value parenting as a high value area usually don't treat people who don't value parenting right. So for instance, if there's some work that needs to be done and somebody needs to stay late, usually the people with kids are the people who would turn to the others who don't have kids and say, hey, you don't have kids. You don't have to go to the ball game. You don't have dance recitals. Why don't you stay over? My response would be, I may not have kids, but I have a life, right? I may not have kids, but I have other priorities. So just like parenting is a priority for you, I may want to go work out because physical well-being is a priority for me. What happens with these value systems is that in most times, they get into this conflict. They get into conflict. So grab that piece of paper again. I want to put us through another exercise. And this one is just for you. I want you to really think about your identity, because your identity comes from a couple of different places. Definitely your values play a role in identity, but also you build your identity from your family, from the feedback that your family gives you either on a daily basis or weekly basis or a monthly basis or a yearly basis. But family plays a big role in how we identify ourselves. Your education plays a big role in how we identify ourselves. I was watching TV the other day, and it was again about the Ahmaud Arbery case, and the lawyer for the guy who shot the video was on screen talking about his client's education, and my mouth fell open because I could not believe what he was saying in terms of how low a high school education is to that community. My daughter and I actually went and looked up the high schools in that community just because we were so shocked that this guy was speaking so derogatorily about it. And when we looked it up, it was certainly not what was described. In fact, they had some really high-ranking schools there. And so, again, education could be one way that you think about your identity. What you get from the media, which is what I was just talking about, also helps build your identity. The media nowadays, let's say it can be very polarizing. You're either for or against. You're either Democrat or you're Republican. You're either American or you're not American. And some of these are false equivalencies, right? They're the false ends of the spectrum, because all of us have within us these things that not just make us soul, but they make us different and intertwined and interconnected. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to jot down all of those things that you feel are your identity. We'll start first there. Those characteristics that makes you who you are. So you could say, I'm a mother, I'm a brother, I'm a employee, I'm a Christian. So whatever those things are, I want you to list as many of those as you can. I'll give you about 20 seconds. Just, you're the only one looking at it, so you don't have to spell it out, or you don't have to worry about the spelling. So just write it out. What are those things that are a part of your identity?
Right, you're making sure you're clear that this is not a chatted in list. This is your list on your piece of paper in front of you.
I want people to include, I want them to write their list out first. And if you have a chance and you want to chat it in, do, but I'm more interested in, this is affirmative introspection. So this is really for you to list these identities, because there's a road that I'm driving down towards. So I really want you to look at yourself. All right. So on that list, now here's what I want you to do. I want you to identify which of those identities that you've listed are either dominant identities or subordinate identities. So a dominant identity is an identity that experiences some sort of privilege. And you hear people hear the word privilege, and the connotation is white privilege. Yes, white privilege is a dominant identity. It is. Let's not beat around the bush with it. White privilege is a dominant identity. But believe it or not, there are other dominant identities. So for instance, I'm right-handed. I write with my right hand. That is a dominant identity. And again, I don't want to water down this, but I love giving examples that bring people to a place of understanding before taking them higher. My right-handedness is a dominant identity. It's a place of privilege. The example that I give is a long time ago, people who were left-handed would have to play the guitar to the best of their ability using the right-handed guitar that was made. Nowadays, there's left-handed guitars, but once upon a time, there were no left-handed guitars. All the guitars were the same. They were made for right-handed people. I tell people, when you go into work, how many times did you stop to look for the entrance or the exit and try to find what is the ramp that I can use to get in here? Very often, we don't do that because we're in a place of privilege. Our identity as an able-bodied person who can walk in and out of a door without looking for a ramp, that is a dominant identity. And so, again, I want you to list all of your dominant identities. Those identities that you say, I didn't know it was, I don't think it's dominant, but think about the privilege that you experience. As a male, my masculinity is a dominant identity. Whether or not I want to acknowledge that, it is the truth that being a male is a dominant identity. Then I want you to list, now you've listed, I want you to now jot down next to what you've listed, those identities that are subordinate identities. So the identities that experience some sort of oppression. Me being Black is a subordinate identity in America. I don't claim that identity. Let's get that clear. I don't claim that, but me being Black is considered a subordinate identity in America. I'll tell you, and most of you who are in auxiliaries, or part of my auxiliary family, you'll know that I'm from Liberia. And I came to America in 1998. And one of the first things I experienced, I went to a mall, and there was a security guard following me every store that I went in. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't care. I mean, I was just happy to be in America and happy to be in the mall. Well, I went home, and I was living with a family, a wonderful family. It was a Caucasian family. So I said, I have to tell you, there's this person just following me in the mall. And the lady laughed, and she said, "You know what that was?" I said, "No." She said, "Well, that's called racial profiling. That person was thinking that because you're a young guy, and I was 19 at the time, I had my baggy jeans and my baggy shirt. I mean, I was the stuff. I don't care what anybody says, Catherine. I was the stuff. So I was more happy about being there. But she told me that person followed you because they thought you were about to steal something. I was happy to be in America. Stealing something wasn't anywhere on the list of things that I wished to accomplish while I was here. Again, that was a subordinate identity that I assumed the minute I came to America. Why? Because in Liberia, everybody there looked like me. So I really didn't have to worry about what my skin features looked like at the time. Here's the point that I'm trying to make. I believe we all have something called amnesia. And here's what amnesia is. Amnesia is when we're in our dominant identities and we see somebody who's in a subordinate identity being oppressed, really taken advantage of. It's a rude, weird, crude joke that shouldn't have happened. Rather than stepping up and speaking up, we do the bystander effect. We do nothing. We stay quiet. We walk away. We don't engage. We never call out the wrong when the wrong is wrong, because we're in our dominant identity. What I want you to not do is have that amnesia, because just every single one of us know how it feels to be in a subordinate identity. White males, for instance, is an example that I give. So a white male who may be a renowned scholar, but from South Georgia and has the Southern twang, his whiteness is a dominant identity. Yes. But he goes to New York City and he starts talking and people hear the Southern drawl. And every time he opens his mouth to speak, folks chuckle as if he's the most ignorant person out there simply because of what he sounds like, right? He shifted from being a dominant identity to now the state that he's from and where he's from in the state has now put him in a subordinate identity. The anger that he will feel inside, the anger that will really pick up and how he will clench his fist, because it is not fair and it's not right to be judged based on those identities. I never want him to forget that anger, because when he comes back to Georgia and he's back in his dominant identity and he sees an Hispanic person or a Latino or a woman or somebody from the LGBT community being treated less than, I want him to remember and recall the feeling he had in New York City when he was treated less than, and I want him to immediately stand up, and I want him to immediately react. Why is this important? It's important because if we have amnesia, then nothing changes. So when I was doing this presentation, I thought I should add a few COVID-19 words, since most of us are very, very familiar about these words. So COVID-19 word number one for you that I want to leave you with is asymptomatic. Most of you know what asymptomatic is, right? If you're asymptomatic, that means you have the virus, but you're not showing any signs. I want to let you all know that this whole thing about affirmative introspection and looking into ourselves is important, because there are a number of us, many of us, who are asymptomatic when it comes to how we treat people in terms of discriminatory actions, behaviors, and thoughts. We're asymptomatic. We're walking around and we look like we're the best human beings ever, but we're asymptomatic. Our value system clash with what true value system should be in terms of how we respect human beings. Our value system in terms of culture, our value system in terms of sexual orientation, our value system in terms of age and age discrimination or so toward, but we never get an opportunity to get tested, which is my other word I will come to. So we walk around thinking that we're the best human beings, but we're asymptomatic. We still carry the hate, the hatred, the discrimination of the historical context of what's happened here in this great United States of America. What I want you to do when you do your affirmative introspection is ask yourself, am I asymptomatic when it comes to truly opening up and engaging short of these hidden biases? Now, bias, we all have biases, but when we act on our biases, when we make decisions on our biases, when we discriminate based on those biases, then we put our communities and our workplaces, then we undermine the beauty of and the value of the diversity that it brings. So my question to you is, after you do your affirmative introspection, ask yourself, am I asymptomatic? And what are those symptoms that are under there? What are those value areas that really get challenged for me? I'm going to skip these in the interest of time. Actually, I'm going to go back and just run through them. Most of you may or may not know Rachel Dolezal. Her name has changed. Her name is now Nikichi Diallo. Rachel Dolezal is the same person you see on the left of your screen that is on the right of your screen. She became the NCAA Spokane, Washington chapter president. She was born white, identified. There was a whole Netflix series called The Rachel Divide. If you haven't seen it, go and look at it. It dives a little deeper into her story and why she decided to completely transform herself and represent herself as Black. So a lot of anger about this. African Americans felt like this was beyond appropriation. The Rachel Divide really talks about, again, some of the reasons and the things that led Rachel to doing what she did and being who she did. Now, Rachel made a lot of mistakes. She incited a lot of things, but she identified as Black and represented herself as Black, although she was born white. Think about it. What are those things? What are those emotions that are invoked when you see this? What are the emotions invoked when you see Caitlyn Jenner, who once upon a time used to be Bruce Jenner, the Olympian? What are the emotions when you see this? When you look at this, the quote, "The only disability in life is a bad attitude," and that was actually done by one of the most the quote was made by one of the most respected people with a disability. The problem with that quote is that is not the only disability. I know of people who have a disability who is difficult for them to wake up in the morning and to move around, and their disability is not a bad attitude. They can have the best attitude there is. They still have a disability. That's some accommodations will need to be made for. Or this one, what are the emotions that are evoked when you see this photo and you see this ad? And this was actually an ad by Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, close to home, that says it's hard to be a little girl if you're not. The ad was about obesity, but the ad just touched areas in people, or the ad showed some blindness that to me was really stunning the first time that I saw it. Or this one that was on the building in an inner city that says that the most dangerous place for an African American is in the womb. Or this one by our own sister university, University of North Georgia. I actually used to work in the office of diversity here at Georgia when this ad came out, and I did get a call about this ad that says, "Why follow when you can lead?" Now, some of us see absolutely nothing wrong with this ad. I'll show you. Look at the people at the top. Look at how they're dressed. Look at how they're even running this race. But then look at the individuals at the back. The Black guy can barely hold his own. The woman is struggling. And the caption is, "Why follow when you can lead?" Or this particular ad. Now, I'll give you 10 seconds to look at this ad, because I was appalled when I saw this. And you may ask yourself, there's nothing wrong with this ad. These pops are having fun. We've got the touristy pops. I mean, there's the slider skateboarder pop. There's the arcade pop. There's the corn on the stick pop. I'm going to draw your attention back. The corn on the stick pop. but in front of the corn on a stick shop is this one. Now, the only pot that's brown on this pot box is a janitor. The only pot that's a different color. For me, these things speak to asymptomatic, that there are feelings and emotions inside of us that we either are completely unaware of or completely decide to disregard. This one was from a college president, I think in Tennessee, decided to invite the African-American students to his home for dinner. The centerpiece on the table were cotton stalks. And yeah, he fed them greens and cornbread and mac and cheese, but the centerpiece were cotton stalks. Or this H&M ad that says the coolest monkey in the jungle is that young man right there. Now, my second COVID-19 word is tested. We never know that we're asymptomatic until we get tested. And I will tell you, in the work that we do in auxiliary services, there are multiple ways that we get tested every single day. There are multiple ways that in our engagement, we're tested to see whether or not we take our value and put it over the values that our UGA community is trying to espouse. We take our own values and make it more important than the importance that we in auxiliary and at the University of Georgia places on diversity and inclusion. And some of us miserably fail these tests. I've been in interactions even in this short time that we've been doing the online stuff. I've been in interactions and I've read chat messages that tells us that some of us are asymptomatic just based on the test results, based on these situations that we face. So 3 questions that the model addresses. In your diverse world, what are you ambiguous about? What are those things that you're just not sure of? You just don't know. I'll give you a quick example for me of what one of those things are. And then I've got to hurry up I'll take the next 7 minutes to close this up because I do want to hear some of the comments that are out there. But for me, I don't know if you all remember when there was a time where the border issue was really, really big and the migrant caravan, as it was called, I was ambiguous about that. And I was ambiguous about that because of several reasons. And ambiguous meaning I just didn't know where I stood. I know on one hand I was on this side of the argument, but on the other hand I was on the other side of the argument, and I just didn't know. My values were in conflict. And it's okay for your values to be in conflict. What's not okay is for you to pick a side out of ignorance, out of not really examining an issue fully, simply because you were told to do so. So on that particular issue, I was really torn. Why was I torn? For a couple of reasons. Number one, I was torn because it took me 20 years to become a U.S. citizen. 20 years. So I knew the pathway that people like me had to go through to be a part of this wonderful country that we love and had always dreamed to be a part of. So one side of me said, no, people need to wait their turn and need to do all of that. All of the talking points that you've heard, I'll admit, I thought about those because it took me 20 years to get to where I was. That was one side. The other side of me, no one has felt to be like as a child and go through some of the most horrific things possible. In fact, around that same time in my home, I had 4 boys that weren't technically my birth kids, but as a foster parent were my kids, and I was fully responsible for them and know that they have been through some really, really adverse circumstances. You know, the youngest was 3 months old when they came to us, and the eldest was 5 years old. 4 brothers, all 4 biological brothers. And so I'm holding this baby in my hand and thinking about the babies and the children that were going through some difficult circumstances at the border. And so on that issue, I don't know. I didn't know. I could not make up my mind because my value systems were in conflict. The question for you is, what are those ambiguous things? Here's the deal. Not being sure where you stand, it's okay. And I'm opening up an opportunity to talk to as many of you as possible, either when we get back to campus, even while we're still out, to reach out and talk if there are feelings that are being triggered, right? Think about the changes in diversity. I tell there's a Christmas tree example that I give. I love Christmas. I will play Christmas songs right now. And when I work for the Office of Institutional Diversity, Dr. Michelle Cook kind of enlightening us about something. We were about to decorate this big Christmas tree, and she's like, well, Christmas is great, but as an Office of Institutional Diversity that is celebrating all these different cultures, have we celebrated the other cultures and the other holidays like we have for Christmas? And a part of me was like, well, I like Christmas. Everybody likes Christmas. Everybody should like Christmas. But I understood that I was a part of a public space. And that public space was open to all these different cultures and communities and beliefs. And I had to be respectful of that public space. So yeah, it triggered emotions inside of me. It triggered a response inside of me as well. I have 3 Christmas trees in my house. But I still have to be respectful of that space. Listen, y'all, there's a master narrative that exists that we all have bought into, that we're a democratic society with good, moral, decent human beings, that truth and justice should be valued, that we live in a meritocratic society, and if you work hard, you can be successful, and equal access and opportunities are the hallmarks of American society and American culture. And that all of the isms, racism, sexism, all of the isms are terrible, and they're a thing of the past. We're in a post-racial era. When the truth of the matter is we live in a society that there are groups that have advantages and groups that have disadvantages. That is, the ordinary people, it's the people like you and me who do the most harm in terms of our relational exchanges. That we don't often treat people with fairness and with respect, but we treat them in discriminatory ways. That we hate talking about diversity and racism and gender inequity and sexual orientation because it reflects that our value systems are in a different place. That equal access and equal opportunity for all, not really a 100% truth. It's not 100% false, but we need to acknowledge that is what we face in America. That everybody just can't work hard to go. That some of us are judged of characteristics that we shouldn't be judged of. And I don't want you not to see that I'm a Black man, that the color of my skin matters. I don't want you to say, oh, we should be colorblind. No, don't be colorblind. Please see me, because if you don't see a Black man, then you miss a big part of who Randolph Carter is. And that all of these isms are alive, they're well, they're thriving. Maybe it's symptomatic in folks, but they're there. I want to show you something real quickly. I want to show you this map. This is a map of America. It's a map of America, and it was the map from the 2010 census. So if you haven't had a chance to take the census yet, please do. This map is going to be updated by the time the census is completed, but the millions of dots, and every dot represents one of us. So it's really interesting when you see how loaded the east of the country is versus the west. When we add some color to the map, it shows us the blues are the whites, the blacks are the greens, the reds are the Asians, the light browns are Hispanics, and the dark browns are other races, including American Indians. Again, it shows you what America looks like demographically. I want to draw us in a little closer. So we're in the Southeast. This is what the Southeast looks like. When you look from Pennsylvania and Virginia, working your way down to South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, this is what we look like. And you can see the darker the colors become, those are concentrated population centers. So close to home is Atlanta. I wanted to show you this particular map, because this map shows you what we live like and what we look like in Atlanta, and you even see in Athens, it also shows you. But if you haven't noticed, there is a segregation that's already happening just based on how we live. If you look at the blues live mostly to the north. We have the speckles of the reds, which will be our Asian Americans, and then we have some of the browns, which will be our Hispanic Americans, right? But then down here, we have our greens. So it's almost like somebody took a V-shaped cone and put it and divided us. Let me tell you the beauty about UGA. What UGA does, it gives all of us an opportunity to be in the same space. So a student from Roswell and a student from Jonesboro or Stockbridge or McDonald can come to UGA and operate in the same space. A staff member from Liberia and a staff member from Venezuela can come and operate in the same space. We have this unique platform to not remain like this, as divided as these things are, but we have an opportunity to really, really give to people the respect, the fairness, the equity that's needed. Now, let's park our students for a second, and I'll close here. I'm not just talking about how we treat our students. Important, because our students and our visitors that come in and our faculty and staff, very important how we treat them. Very important. Very important how we respect the differences and the diversities that exist. Very important. For me, what's more important is how we treat the person next to you, how we treat the person you supervise, how we treat the person who is wiping the windows or driving the bus or in the dish room or is a part of the cleaning crew or is ordering the stocks or is doing, how we treat each other, regardless of where we stand on the spectrum, regardless of what our title says, regardless of how much money we make or don't make. For me, it's the most important thing that will transform our work when we get back to campus. We have, I call it social distancing, right? And social distancing for me, well, the social architecture that says each and every one of us have to build these spaces. Yes, we have to lock horns. We have to respect the differences of the people who we work next to. We have to respect the differences in the people who supervise us. We have to respect the differences in the people who we supervise. We just have to respect each other and value each other and value these differences. That's the only way we can move forward. That's social architecture. But we also have to social distance those asymptomatic people or people who are now full-blown symptomatic. They're showing us that they don't belong in our family. They don't belong in our culture. Their views, as much as we appreciate difference, are bringing people down. Their views, as much as we appreciate difference, are views that speak to our more than versus less than, more than and less than mentality. I enjoy working in Auxiliary. I value every single employee in Auxiliary and look forward to continue working with you all. But I know that when we come back, Katrina, Carla, and I will still have employee relations stuff that we have to take care of. My hope and my goal is that when you engage and then when we engage, that we're not going to be fighting those battles of less than and more than, have and have not, respect versus disrespect. That each of us are going to value what makes us this unique and diverse space where we can interact and achieve both our personal and professional goals. Kathleen, I'm going to stop here. I think there's about 2 minutes. And are there any comments that we can take or likewise?
There's a lot. There's a lot of the comments that came in. Trying to go back and see if yeah, there's a lot. Okay. Go back. If I go back to where we were when you cut us off from our diversity, India mentioned that she personally felt that the African-American population is underrepresented at UGA.
Can I comment on that real quickly? So yes, and actually there are, for the University of Georgia, Blacks, Hispanics are historically underrepresented. They're called that, historically underrepresented populations. And Black, Hispanic, American Indians, those are all our historically underrepresented populations.
Maria said that UGA International Student Life host a coffee hour every Friday where you can learn about different cultures and try different cuisine if you're interested in that.
Absolutely.
Pamela said UGA portrays the message that your voice is heard and respected. The community embraces multiple religions and cultural practices. Inclusion is a very real and active word on campus.
I would agree. We're building, but our community is not without its challenges. So I don't want us to just always take this, oh, things are getting better. Yes, they are. But there are some challenges that we've had to deal with and we will continue to deal with. But together we become stronger.
Let's see. Mariah said UGA is more diverse than her hometown, but in comparison to Atlanta, for example, she thinks they could be more diverse. The cost of tuition makes our population skewed more towards higher income majority white students.
Yep, that's socioeconomic diversity. Absolutely.
Then India said, I see a fair amount of African-American workers, but far less students represented.
I will respond to India. Believe it or not, you would be surprised that in terms of auxiliaries, for instance, we have less African American workers than white workers. In auxiliaries, we have more women working in auxiliaries than we have men. So just FYI, there's some numbers there as well.
Adam said, I feel that UGA is diverse, but a lot of time, especially with students, people are grouped into cliques. Katrina said UGA is still lacking with minorities in management roles.
That's true.
Paige said she moved from Washington State to Mississippi 3 years ago, and she can guarantee that those two examples that you gave, they are not the same.
Absolutely. All right, Captain, we got 11:02. Let's take one more.
We do. Okay. About the advertisements. Okay, so clearly they didn't have a very good design marketing team. So we got that pretty much covered. All of those should have had somebody going, better not. But a lot of things you really don't notice until you actually look at it and read it and see. It can be very frightening, but yes, that they're shame on their marketing departments. All right. We're at 11:03. Thank you everyone for joining us this morning. This afternoon is how to find your why. WHY, not YMCAY. But that's this afternoon at 2 o'clock, and we look forward to seeing everyone there that can join. And again, if you have any other comments, questions, please send them in through the survey and feedback link. Have a great rest of your morning. Bye, everybody.
Take care.